Welcome to the Standard of Truth podcast. In this podcast, Dr. Gerrit Dirkmaat and Professor Richard Leduc explore the early history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the life and teachings of Prophet Joseph Smith. They examine the original historical sources and provide context for events of the past. They approach the history of the Church with faith, expertise, and humor.
Hi, welcome to another episode of the Standard of Truth podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Gerrit Dirkmaat, and I'm joined by my friend, Professor Richard Leduc.
Hello, Gerrit. In this week's podcast, we are going to do part 2 of Gerrit Goes Hard in the Paint on on Hurlbut and Solomon Spaulding. So we teased a bit of a rant that Gerrit did in a premium episode several weeks ago that's about 26 minutes.
Wouldn't it just be easier for me to rant again?
We already did it.
I see. So the moment's gone.
Well, so, I mean, I don't know. You recaptured an element of that last week, I felt, and I thought it was great. I love it when, so I am not able to articulate some of the feelings that I have about many of these types of anti-Mormon arguments. And so when you do that, I feel like, yeah, I wish I could say it like that. And so I think a lot of people like it. We've gotten a lot of very positive response to that. And I feel like a lot of people feel attacked a lot. And so when you go hard in the paint, it makes people feel like, hey, you know what? Yeah, that's what I think. That's great. That's well articulated. And so we're going to skip the Phoebe Draper Palmer mailbag, and we're going to get straight into it so we don't run out of time.
You missed the Brown part of that. So now the Brown part, they're coming for you.
The Phoebe Draper Palmer Brown. It's the last one.
If you don't say Brown, they're coming for you.
They know. I'm so sorry to the family of the
We have a lot of people who listen to our podcast that are just very big into family history. And if you miss a middle name of one of their ancestors, they're coming for you.
Well, here's the thing: she had a nice big family, and there's a lot of ancestors,
and they respect her
as they should.
Yeah,
she's incredible.
So they're coming for you.
Well, so anyway, no disrespect to the Phoebe Draper Palmer Brown mailbag, but we're going to jump straight in to Mormonism Unveiled.
Well, so we started talking a little bit about it. And apparently the rant that we're going to queue up near the end is more a rant about Philassus Hurlbut. So let me just talk a little bit about this. Philassus Hurlbut is someone who is excommunicated from the church for committing adultery on his mission. He begs to get back into the church, and Joseph, because Joseph he's filled with clemency, allows him to get back into the church, and then he immediately commits adultery again. And this
missionaries are wont to do.
Well, I mean, that's, what are you going to do? And then he's going to go around claiming that Joseph never should have brought him back into the church, and that he clearly isn't a prophet because I was just lying to him when I was saying that I was sorry. And then he's going to undergo a speaking circuit in which he's going to claim that he knows all of the inside workings of the Latter-day Saints because he was an elder in the church, which is a big deal if you're anything other than a Latter-day Saint.
Well, if you recall, actually, several years ago, when there was an issue on the BYU basketball team, that there was a misunderstanding about many of those things relating to elders and this kind of stuff in terms of their...
So you're saying the news media did not slowly try to understand how it is that Latter-day Saint priesthood and hierarchy works?
I'm saying it's possible,
but not even probable.
It's possible. I just remember that he's an elder in the church. All right, slow your roll.
So you mean he's 18?
Yeah, right. So, but I mean that
an elder of the Latter-day Saints was arrested.
I am saying that nothing has actually changed.
Yeah, it's exactly the same. So Hurlbut is going to petition to get back into the church. He's going to get back in and then immediately be excommunicated again. This time he's going to undertake a speaking circuit where he claims to have insider information, and he attacks Joseph Smith. He's going to be paid by the other resident anti-Mormon, Eber Howe, to go back to Pennsylvania and New York and to collect as many negative affidavits as he possibly could. As the rant, we'll talk more about the character of Hurlbut. I'm going to leave it from there, but just talk about this whole idea of the Solomon Spaulding manuscript and to demonstrate just how deceitful people can be with their lies. I know that you probably didn't tune in today saying, you know what? I'd like to read a little bit from an anti-Mormon book, but you know what? It's coming for you. Here it is. So a big portion of the book was the argument of where the origin of the Book of Mormon comes from, because this is still the great problem for antagonists of Joseph Smith. How is it that he had plates? When you have all these people who said he had plates, he clearly has something. And how is it that this ne'er-do-well, quote-unquote illiterate farm boy produced this massive book and so there's been people trying to give arguments about where the book originated from for a long time. Hurlbut is going to claim that, in fact, the book comes from a former minister who's now deceased, so it's very easy. If ever you're looking to blame something on someone, blame it on someone who's dead. It's the best move because they can't defend themselves, at least not now. Now, maybe Uncle Lester in the next life would be like, I wasn't the one who put that there. Why did you tell everybody I did it? Well, I figured that they wouldn't come at me if
I've been doing it for years.
Yeah. Who's the deceased relative you blame things on?
My grandfather, my great-grandfather.
Your great-grandfather.
Yeah.
What about the one who owned an acre in Montreal?
My great-great-great-great-great-grandfather.
Yeah, you blame him for not expanding the family's land holdings.
I do, actually.
Yeah, it is pretty, he owned an entire acre. Land filled with almost free land. He was able to eke out 1 acre.
No, I feel immediately guilty. My great-grandfathers were great. They're great guys. Yeah.
You just blame yourself.
I never blame myself. My goodness,
because you have kids.
Well, yeah, I would never blame myself. I don't have the self-awareness or the.
Yeah, but I've met Becky, and I'm pretty sure you ain't blaming her either.
Oh my gosh, no.
Yeah,
never.
That's just the fact that I just said that. We're gonna have to stop the podcast.
Well, first of all, if I blamed her, no one would believe it. That's the biggest reason. That's the biggest problem. It's like, so Becky said that? Yeah, Becky said that.
No, she didn't. No, you're right.
Becky did that? Yeah, Becky did that.
Yeah.
No, she didn't. Okay, I did it.
So it's not very it's hard.
It's less effective for me.
Less effective. Yeah. Well, so Eber Howe, who hates Latter-day Saints for lots of reasons, not least of which is that his wife becomes one. He produces the first anti-Mormon book that's written in 1834. And he uses these affidavits that Philastus Hurlbut collects after he's excommunicated. He goes back and collects these affidavits. And among them is the argument that he knows where the real origin of the Book of Mormon comes from. And the claim is that the Book of Mormon actually comes from this preacher, Solomon Spaulding, who wrote it as what they will call as a romance, but a romance is a way of, it means the novel, essentially. It means a novel or a fictitious, story. Today we only mean that, we write that because we mean that it's something. It's like The Notebook or something. No, that's not what it means. It means that it's a novel. It's a fictitious book. Part of the affidavits that Hurlbut collected were from what you would assume would be credible people talking about the origin of the Book of Mormon. So, for instance, how about the brother of Solomon Spaulding? Okay. You'd think he would know what's going on, right? Brother of Solomon Spaulding?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Should we read what he has to say?
Yeah, let's.
In our continuing effort to bring anti-Mormonism to the people.
Bill Spaulding? What's his name?
It's John Spaulding.
Oh, John.
Guess I'm Bill, though.
I always go with Bill.
Most of them are named William, but this guy's named John. Solomon Spaulding was born in Ashford, Connecticut in 1761. In an early life, he contracted a taste for literary pursuits. After he left school, he entered Plainfield Academy, where he made a great proficiency of study and excelled most of his classmates. He next commenced the study of law in Windham County, in which he made little progress, having in the meantime turned his attention to religious subjects. He soon entered Dartmouth College, with the intention of qualifying himself for the ministry, where he obtained a degree of A.M. and was afterwards regularly ordained. After preaching 3 or 4 years, he gave it up, removed to Cherry Valley, New York, and commenced the mercantile business in company with his brother Josiah. In a few years, he failed in business, and in the year 1809, he moved to Conneaut, Ohio. The year following, I removed to Ohio, and I found him engaged in building a forge. I made him a visit in about 3 years and found that he had failed and considerably involved in debt. He told me that he'd been writing a book, which he introduced to which he intended to have printed, the avails of which he thought would enable him to pay off his debts. The book was entitled Manuscript Found, of which he read to me many passages. Okay, so John is not just saying, I know my brother wrote a book that was about whatever we're about to learn it's about, but he read it to me. That's how I know that this is where the Book of Mormon.
Classic John, am I right?
Well, John's gonna John. It's what he does. It was a historical romance, and again, in the 19th century, it means it's a historical fiction. It was a historical romance of the first settlers of America. Endeavoring to show that the Americans, the isn't in the book, just so everyone knows. That was
It'd be funny if he was saying that.
It was like, and thus we see how vain are the. Anyway.
You do your Mormon, because that's how he would write
exactly.
it. Because he wrote it, not Mormon.
My favorite part of the Book of Mormon is when Mormon can't resist providing editorial commentary.
Yeah. Thus we see.
I love it.
Oh, yeah.
And thus we see how vain and foolish the hearts of men. And so we see this people turned away. I mean, Mormon can't help himself from saying, well, this is ridiculous.
I mean, the guy's so frustrated.
Yeah. He's well aware of what it's like when people turn away from the Lord because he's experiencing it. Anyway, back to our anti-Mormonism. It endeavored to show that the American Indians are descendants of the Jews or the lost tribes. It gave a detailed account of their journey from Jerusalem by the land of the sea till they arrived in America under the command of Nephi and Lehi. Well, I guess I've just proven that the Book of Mormon was invented by Solomon Spaulding because
this is definitive.
John says that it even has Nephi and Lehi in it.
He read it to him many times. Many times.
He's read it so many times. They afterwards had quarrels and contentions and separated into two distinct nations, one of which denominated Nephites, the other Lamanites. Cruel and bloody wars ensued, in which great multitudes were slain. They buried their dead in large heaps, which caused the mounds so common in this country. Their arts, sciences, and civilization were brought into view in order to account for all the curious antiquities found in various parts of North and South America. I have recently read the Book of Mormon, and to my surprise, oh boy, that's probably the greatest lie. What are you saying in here? To my surprise, I find nearly the same historical matter, names, etc., as were in my brother's writings. I well remember that he wrote in an old style. He commenced every sentence with, and it came to pass. And now it came to pass. The same as in the Book of Mormon. And according to my best recollection and belief, it is the same as my brother Solomon wrote, with the exception of a religious matter. By what means it has fallen into the hands of Joseph Smith, I am unable to determine. John Spaulding. Well, that sounds pretty powerful.
That's powerful.
It's just made up. Even the end, it came to pass.
Yeah.
And I mean, he's read both. How could he not know that?
He was shocked, surprised, stunned, amazed.
Maybe we should read Martha Spaulding's affidavit.
Martha is
Solomon, the wife of John Spaulding.
Okay.
So John's wife. John, who's the brother. So this is the sister-in-law of Solomon Spaulding.
So John, great source. His wife, better source.
Well, I mean, if it's anything like me and Angie, me, source, Angie, better source.
Yeah, me, source, Becky, better source.
Yeah.
There you go.
You know what? We should just call our podcast Our Wives Are a Better Source. That's what we should call it. I was personally acquainted with Solomon Spaulding about 20 years ago. I was at his house a short time before he left Cunniat. I don't know. Am I saying that right? I have no idea.
Oh, yeah, you're nailing it.
Yeah, it looks like Connecticut with an EAUT at the end.
It's a very fun. Yeah, in French, they would just drop like the last 7 letters.
Can you?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Someone who speaks French is now busily writing us an email to let us know how wrong we are.
We won't be able to read it.
Yeah.
It's in French.
No, they're going to write in English to tell us, I serve my mission in Quebec. And
you know what? Let's see how their English is. Let's see how it goes.
Okay, so we're going to
You know what? I dare you to come at us with your poor English and your
amazing
proper
French. Yeah. I feel like this is your rebellious French Canadian side coming out.
So I'm obviously kidding. I love the French very deeply, and I feel a close kinship to them and to their Wonder Bar chocolate.
And the fact that we don't have the ability to properly pronounce things, that's
not my,
the pronunciation of things is not our forte. We just want you to know that we're not good at it. Yeah. Anyway, so he stayed there. He was then writing a historical novel founded upon the first settlers of America. He presented them as an enlightened and warlike people. He had for many years contended that the Aborigines of America were descendants of some of the lost tribes of Israel. And this idea he carried out in the book in question.
Oh, Martha.
The lapse of time which has intervened prevents my recollecting but few of the leading incidents of his writings, but the names of Nephi and Lehi are fresh in my memory.
They're fresh.
And being the principal heroes of his tale, they were officers of the company which first came from Jerusalem. He gave a particular account of their journey by land and sea till they arrived in America, after which disputes arose among the chiefs, which caused them to separate into different lands, one of which was called Lamanites, the other called Nephites.
Boy, this is really stacking up against Joseph.
I'm just saying it.
Or Sidney or whoever wrote it.
Yeah, well, we all know that it was just everybody. At this point, someone's going to start making the claim that AI wrote it. Between these were recounted tremendous battles which frequently covered the ground with the slain, and their being buried in large heaps was the cause of the numerous mounds in the county. It's almost like that's almost word for word of what her husband just said. But
well, because they read the same thing, Gerrit. Yeah. I mean,
I have read the Book of Mormon, which has brought fresh to my recollection the writings of Solomon Spaulding, and I have no manner of doubt that the historical part of it is the same that I read and heard more than 20 years ago. The old obsolete style and phrases of "and it came to pass" are the same.
Oh, Martha. Oh, Christmas.
Well, we now know where the Book of Mormon obviously comes from. You know what, though? Let's go beyond the Spaulding family to other credible witnesses.
Well, I mean, they're pretty definitive, and they're pretty.
Well, let's see what Henry Lake has to say.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, okay.
Who's Henry Lake?
Well, we'll find out.
Okay.
Henry Lake's going to introduce.
Let's go on the journey together, Gerrit.
Yeah, let's diddly-do. Let's go into a time when we know who Henry Lake is. I left the state of New York late in the year 1810 and arrived at this place about the 1st of January following. Soon after my arrival, I formed a co-partnership with Solomon Spaulding.
Interesting.
Okay. Well, he's his business partner.
His business partner, yeah.
For the purpose of rebuilding a forge which he had commenced a year or two before. He very frequently, okay, how could you be more definitive? Very frequently. Read to me from a manuscript which he was writing, which he entitled Manuscript Found, and which he represented as being found in this town. Oh, okay. I spent many hours hearing him read said writings. Now, first of all, that you're a better business partner than I would be. I can only imagine, like, I just need you to help pay off this forge. Shut up. This is ridiculous.
Well, but if it's the Book of Mormon, it's a pretty good book. So you're not being fair to Henry Lake.
Yeah, I'm not being fair to Henry Lake. I spent many hours hearing him read said writings and became well acquainted with its contents.
Oh, good.
He wished me to assist him in getting his production printed, alleging that a book of this kind would meet with a rapid sale. I designed doing so, But the forge was not meeting our anticipations. We failed in business when I declined having anything to do with the publication of the book. This book represented the American Indians as the descendants of lost tribes, gave an account of their leaving Jerusalem, their contentions and wars, which were many great. One time, when he was reading to me the tragic account of Laban, I pointed out to him what I considered an inconsistency, which he promised to correct. But by referring to the Book of Mormon, I find to my surprise that it stands there just as he read it to me then. Now, how can you get more definitive than this? I totally remember he brought up this guy Laban, and he said something that wasn't accurate about it. And I looked in the Book of Mormon, it's still there.
Hold on. I'd like to start with, there's a couple of things, just really quick. And we'll get back to the anti-Mormon stuff really quick.
Very soon.
Very soon. First of all, Henry Lake was right. 200 million copies printed. So it would have done great numbers.
Well, then how come Henry Lake pulled his support for it?
Oh, that's what I'm saying. One of the greatest blunders.
The great blunders
Yeah.
of Henry Lake. Yeah.
A land war in Asia and not going through the pretty
Never going to get the Thethelian when death is on the line.
So that's number one. Number two, I feel like them saying that they've read the Book of Mormon, but they're only referencing things that have happened in the first couple of chapters.
Well, look, they're like all of our teenagers.
That's what I'm
Hey,
saying.
have you read the Book of Mormon? Yeah, I've read it.
So
what part? I, Nephi, having been born of goodly parents.
I got to Laban and stuff. No one's mentioning Helaman hasn't been referenced. I haven't.
Well, I mean, once you've read the deception that is First Nephi, why do you need to go all the way through
But
it?
I'm just saying, it's I've read the entire Book of Mormon. I'd like to reference the first chapter.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we've talked about Lehi, Nephi, and now Laban.
Yeah, we're chapter 3, 4.
Well, let's see what he has. What's the error about Laban?
Oh my gosh. Let's
Should we
dive.
continue?
Yeah, please.
I think our listeners at home are saying, you know what? Let's continue. And by that, I mean searching for another podcast and listen to that instead. Okay. Some months ago, I borrowed the Golden Bible, put it in my pocket and carried it home, and I thought no more. But after about a week, my wife found the book in my coat. Uh-oh. Sounds like somebody was in trouble. As I hung it up and commenced reading it aloud as I lay upon the bed. She had not read 20 minutes until I was astonished to find the same passages in that Spaulding had read to me more than 20 years before from his Manuscript Found. I mean, this is amazing evidence, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's
Could
amazing.
we get better than this?
Astonished.
Yeah, astonished.
Surprised, shocked.
Since then, I have more fully examined the Golden Bible, and I have no hesitation in saying that the historical part of it is principally, if not wholly, taken from Manuscript Found. That's the name of this Solomon Spaulding supposed book. I well recollect telling Mr. Spaulding that the so frequent use of the words, and it came to pass, and now it came to pass, rendered it ridiculous. So he remembers that it kept saying, and it came to pass. Written in that solemn biblical style, right? Spaulding left here in 1812, and I furnished him the means to carry into Pittsburgh. Oh, what a very kind friend you are. I won't help you publish your book, but I will pay to get you out of town. Where he said he would get the book printed and pay me. Oh, he wanted some proceeds. But I never heard anything more from him or his writings until I saw the Book of Mormon.
I'm just realizing I shouldn't have said the 200 copies printed part because maybe the Lake family estate is going to come after the proceeds.
It's possible. They're like, you know what? Hey, we had everything to do with that. So look,
So that's all right. Solomon's brother, Solomon's
look, there's a
sister-in-law.
lot more in here than we're going to be able to read. I'm just grabbing a few.
Okay, well, and then his business partner.
Yes. Yep. Should we grab another one?
Yeah.
The people listening at home, you want to hear more of this, don't you?
I continue to be astonished with these.
Well,
these witnesses.
They're so good.
These are affidavits, Gerrit?
Oh, yes. They're things that people said happened.
They're signed affidavits?
Well, we don't have they probably are. We don't have the originals. but
so Hurlbut said that they said this.
Yes. And they probably did. Look, he's being paid to collect affidavits. I don't know what he's giving them.
So Hurlbut's being paid to find people that have evidence that the Book of Mormon was from this, and these people are saying that it is.
Yes.
Probably.
Yeah, they're being pretty definitive. Do you want to here's a couple more. Here's from someone by the name of Oliver Smith. So get a little bit of a Smith in there.
Joseph's third cousin.
When Solomon Spaulding first came to this place, he purchased a tract of land and surveyed it out and commenced selling it. When engaged in this business, he boarded at my house for nearly 6 months.
Okay.
He lived with him for 6 months.
Hey, wait, is this maybe where he wrote some of this?
Let's find out.
Okay.
All of his leisure hours were occupied in writing a historical novel.
Oh my gosh. I haven't read this, and I just guessed. How about that?
You know what? I'm about to find the Richard LeDuc affidavit in here. All of his leisure hours were occupied in writing a historical novel founded upon the first settlers of this country. He said he intended to trace their journey from Jerusalem by land and sea till their arrival in America, give an account of their arts, sciences, civilization, wars, and contentions. In this way, he would give a satisfactory account of all the old mounds so common in this country. During the time that he was at my house, I read, so again, he's not saying he heard. I read and heard 100 pages or more. Lehi and Nephi were represented by him as leading the characters when they first started to America.
Stand by. All right, hold on. All right, just keep going.
You're going to have to go to the 1830 Book of Mormon.
I'm going to go to the
1830
and find 100 pages in and see if we can find anyone named other than Lehi or Nephi.
It's
Lehi. All it is.
Here's what I figured. They started off and then they flipped to the middle and it was 3rd Nephi.
They're like, there's just nothing but Nephi's in here.
It's just all Nephi's.
It's like John back then.
Well, it's kind of like Daryl, and this is my brother Daryl, and this is my other brother Daryl. Do you know that reference?
I don't.
Oh, wow. That's from the Newhart, Bob Newhart show.
I never watched the Bob Newhart show.
Wow. I want everyone to know.
How old do you think I am? Did you watch it on Nick at Night, or how'd you watch it?
It was on TV in Idaho because we had nothing on TV in Idaho.
It's from the 70s.
It was being replayed.
You're a year older than me?
It was brand new in Idaho. It was the first time it had ever been broadcast in Idaho.
Oh, my gosh.
Shelley, Idaho. Okay, during that time, Lehi and Nephi were represented by him as leading characters when they first started for America. Their main object was to escape the judgments which they supposed were coming upon the old world. But no religious matter was introduced, as I now recollect. Just before he left this place, Spaulding sent for me to call on him, which I did. He then said that although he was in my debt, he intended to leave the country and hoped that I would not prevent him. For, says he, I've been writing the history of the first settlement of America, and I intend to go to Pittsburgh and there live a retired life till I've completed the work. And when it is printed, it will bring me a fine sum of money, which will enable me to return and pay off all my debts. The book, will sell, as everyone is anxious to learn something on the subject. This was the last I heard of Spaulding, or his book, until the Book of Mormon came into the neighborhood. When I heard the historical part of it related, I at once said, "This is the writings of old Solomon Spaulding." Soon after I obtained the book, and on reading it found much of it the same as Spaulding has written more than 20 years before.
By the way, so page 100 is around 2 Nephi chapter 10. So
okay, so you know what? It's just all Nephi.
It's all Nephi. It's funny that is Isaiah brought up here? You just copied that, right? So
no, not here. There are people who will bring that up, but not
later.
Yeah,
in this book.
Not in this book. No.
Okay.
No, it's brought up by early on. It's the fact that there are portions of the Bible that are, quote, copied in.
I would imagine that would be a popular thing.
That comes from Alexander Campbell.
Okay.
One of the early antagonists. So.
Sure.
He's not in any way upset that multiple of his ministers are leaving his faith and joining the church.
Unrelated.
Totally unrelated. But yes. So... look, we read several of these. Maybe we'll do just one more and then move on. What do you think?
That sounds great. Gerrit, have you ever heard of the term Gilman amnesia? You ever heard that?
If I did, maybe I forgot. Maybe I haven't.
It's possible. So it's actually a term that's coined by Michael Crichton, the author.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so he has a friend.
Chaos theory.
He has a friend who's a physicist, who's a very smart person.
Okay.
His name is Murray Gilman. And so what happens is that there was a newspaper article about something relating to something that his friend Murray Gilman would be very knowledgeable of as a physicist. And as he read the article, he's like, this is all garbage. Like, none of this is true. Like, like the people that are writing this, the journalist writing this has no idea
They don't even know what they're talking about.
They know what their idea what they're talking about. And yet, the next day, when he will read an article from that same newspaper about something else that he's not an expert on or doesn't know anything about.
He just takes it at face value.
He takes it at face value. And so Michael Crichton coins this term as Gelman amnesia. And I think that this is one of the things that's the most frustrating with all of the because you're about to blow this whole thing up. But
no, I think we'll just let it stand. And this is how we decided to go out as Standard of Truth podcast. The Spaulding manuscript is the Book of Mormon.
But this is the point, right? Is that you are about to talk about the ridiculous nature of these claims. And then later in the book, something else that somebody says about Joseph Smith, someone will just buy and believe.
Yeah, hook, line, and sinker.
Hook, line, and sinker with Gelman amnesia.
People buy all these arguments, hook, line, and sinker. These arguments are repeated over and over and over again. Missionaries in the 1860s, we have their journals where they're trying to preach and people dismiss them and say, well, we all know that your book just comes from Solomon Spaulding's manuscript.
I heard that on my mission. On my mission in California, I heard that.
Yeah, I heard it in Wisconsin, but mainly as people were driving by and shooting paintballs at us.
That's right.
Yeah. There was a drive-by shooting, and by the way, it's a Solomon Spaulding.
I got hit with a giant, like a 7-Up or a 7-Eleven full big gulp chucked right up my tire. It was quite a shot.
Did it knock you off your bike?
It didn't knock me off my bike, but it was a red soda, and it did the trick.
Yeah.
It sure did.
So you were soaked in red soda.
Oh, yeah. Just dripping from it. It was like a 64 ounce.
I'll never forget how angry my companion was that he got shot by these paintballs. I mean, it's a good thing they drove away. I think he would have assaulted them. He was to people paintballing him as a missionary as I am about to be to the Solomon Spaulding manuscript claims. Anyway,
way to tie it back. That's
one last affidavit we'll read, and there are more. I'm just grabbing some. Okay, this is a shorter one. From Aaron Wright.
Oh, okay.
Aaron Wright. I first became acquainted with Solomon Spaulding in 1808 or 1809 when he commenced building a forge on the creek. When at his house one day, he showed and read to me a history that he was writing of lost tribes of Israel, purporting that they were the first settlers of America.
So this is 3 or 4 years earlier than when he was boarding at the
right. So
the Smith home.
Look, this is a legacy of love.
The non-Joseph Smith home.
The non-Joseph Smith, the Oliver Smith. Purporting that they were the first settlers in America and then the Indians were their descendants. Upon this subject, we had frequent conversations. He traced their journey from Jerusalem to America, as it is given in the Book of Mormon, excepting the religious matters. The historical part of the Book of Mormon I know to be the same as I read and heard from the writings of Spaulding more than 20 years ago. The names, more especially, are the same without any alteration. That's a pretty bold claim.
Definitive, yeah.
He told me his object was to account for all the fortifications to be found in this country and said that in time it would be fully believed by all except learned men and historians. I don't know.
Well, you know what?
You know what?
He just indicted you, buddy.
That's that. Well, I'm coming for you. Aaron Wright. I once anticipated reading his writings in print, but little expected to see them in a new Bible. Spaulding had many manuscripts, which I expect to see when Smith translates his other plates. So now, this is where all of Smith's stuff is going to come from now, is all of the manuscripts of Solomon Spaulding. In conclusion, I will observe that the names of and most of the historical part of the Book of Mormon were as familiar to me before I read it as most modern history. If it is not Spaulding's writing, it is the same as he wrote. And if Smith was inspired, I think it was by the same spirit that Spaulding was, which he confessed to be the love of money.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
A double dig.
Yeah, going at it for two there. So look, that all of these people are claiming They read the manuscript. They heard the manuscript read. They're super familiar with the manuscript. I know everything about the manuscript. You don't understand. I've read everything there is to know about the manuscript, right? The problem is, of course, no one had the manuscript. But that was enough. See, when you're dealing with a hated minority group, you don't actually have to demonstrate the claims that you're making. You just have to have a claim. And it sounds plausible. I mean, my goodness, do you think that Solomon Spaulding's brother would lie about the fact that he read that? Is that what you're saying? Still, we don't have the manuscript, so we say, maybe. Most people didn't say maybe. They said, absolutely. Never mind the fact that this is published in a book designed to destroy this religion. Never mind the fact that all of these people are claiming that they read a manuscript that no one can actually verify. We'll take it. We'll make it the argument that your religion is fake and made up. Well, many years later, and again, let me stress the fact that over the course of years, it was argued that where the Book of Mormon came from was the Solomon Spaulding manuscript, to the point where other scholars, religious scholars as well as historians, would say, it's been long established that the Solomon Spaulding manuscript, comes from that the Book of Mormon comes from the Solomon Spaulding manuscript. You can find that in newspapers. You can find it in the congressional record. You can find this discussion that everything just comes from the Solomon Spaulding manuscript. So it had a lot of legs. Well, in 1884, the president of Oberlin College, who is not a Latter-day Saint, through an effort they were making to try to collect the records of early abolitionists in Ohio, they examine some of the files that come out of the Painesville Telegraph Office, which is where Mormonism Unveiled was published. And they find Solomon Spaulding's Manuscript Found, which is, of course, word for word, as we heard so many people testify, from the Book of Mormon. I know that in my later rant that Richard's going to point up, I bring up a little bit of this too. So
That's all right.
You'll have to just give me some grace, both for the rant and for the fact it's repeated. This is what James Fairchild, the president of Oberlin College, had to say when he examined the Manuscript Found and compared it against the Book of Mormon. There seems to be no reason to doubt that this is the long-lost story. Mr. Rice, myself, and others compared it with the Book of Mormon. Okay, so what are we going to find? We're going to find all kinds of the names are all the same.
Well, Lehi Nephi, we're going to hear that.
Stories, yeah, it's all Lehi Nephi. We compared it with the Book of Mormon and could detect no resemblance between the two, in general or in detail. So these people said, some of them said it was word for word the same. Many of them said that the names were all exactly the same. Let me continue with what Mr. Fairchild wrote. There seems to be no name or incident common between the two. Yeah, well, I mean, even if the words aren't the same, he just took all of the stories from his book. That I know that. Well, according to James Fairchild, not a Latter-day Saint, there is no name or incident that's common to the two. Well, they just kept writing like, and it came to pass all the time, though. I mean, I just remember, kept, hey, bro, you can't just keep writing and it came to pass. It's like going to totally turn people off.
Several different people, not related, said
the same thing. The solemn style of the Book of Mormon, in imitation of the English scriptures, does not appear in the manuscript. Yeah, just like every other line was, and it came to pass, trying to write like the Bible, except apparently, nope. The only resemblance is in the fact that both profess to set forth the history of lost tribes. And then James Fairchild, because he is an educated man, comes to the conclusion that you have to come to. Some other explanation of the origin of the Book of Mormon must be found if any explanation is required. Now, That comes at the tail end of the 19th century, after people have, for 60 years, well, 50 years at least, completely dismissed and ridiculed the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith and everyone who believed in it, because it was so obvious that the Book of Mormon actually just came from Solomon Spaulding's manuscript. And what do you find? Despite how close they were with Solomon Spaulding, despite the fact that they know the names of Nephi and Lehi, nothing they said was true. Not part of it, not portions of it. I don't know what caused them to fabricate their stories, but I know that we can definitively demonstrate that the words Nephi and Lehi weren't in that manuscript. Some people were actually so desperate to believe that this was the description of the Book of Mormon that they then actually began to argue, well, maybe he wrote another manuscript, like, I don't know, volume 2 of Manuscript Found, and that was exactly the same as the Book of Mormon. I mean, because people who are desperate, just trying to find a way to sleep at night, that's what they're going to do. Anyway, so we're going to play a clip now that comes from our premium content. In it, I was responding to the fact that people might claim that because Father Smith had a vision that is similar to Lehi's vision of the Tree of Life, that in fact Joseph Smith must have just stolen that part from his father telling the dream and threw it into the Book of Mormon. Ah, ha, 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 ha. And now we see where it comes from. And so, Richard, do we need to set up this clip any more than that?
No, that's a great way to set it up. And in fairness, I was trying to ask an innocent question and talk about.
And there are no innocent questions with me.
Yeah, and you went. I thought it was great, and the passion was real and not manufactured. And I thought that like I said, the reason that I love it and the reason that Becky loves, righteous indignation, Gerrit, is because it's how I feel and how I wish I would be able to articulate some of those things that I just don't have the knowledge of. And so I think the listeners will like it.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Hopefully you enjoy that clip. Thank you for suffering through with us. We will be back to answering more questions next week. What I wish I had an account of is what was it like for Joseph Smith Sr. when he first read First Nephi. How incredible must that experience have been to him to read a prophet of 2,400 years earlier having a similar vision of a tree of life and of a great and spacious building.
One of the things that's interesting about that, Gerrit, that is it's an interesting thought, right? He's like, hey, what? Hey, I had that. But I wonder, like, because that's interesting, right? And somebody who is, antagonistic to the church would be like, oh, okay, well, so that's how, Joseph came up with the idea, because he just kind of took his dad's story. But that story also sounds like the story that Robert Mason tells to Wilford Woodruff in a similar way. There's tree, there's fruit. The fruit is white. He goes to take it, and he can't. Completely unconnected with anything related to Joseph Smith or any of these things. And you've shared multiple experiences where Brigham Young has, all these people disconnected have similar kind of things. Now, Joseph Smith Sr.'s vision of this is, that's pretty spot on, but other people have fairly similar. It's just fascinating how the Lord is preparing these people for the coming forth. So when they see that, they're like, boy, that seems familiar to me.
Well, and the cynic can always say, oh yeah, obviously that's where Joseph Smith took that story and then he just copied it into the Book of Mormon, even though in the Book of Mormon it was far more detailed and had a lot more things to it and was far more, more expertly written by this farm kid who can't write a letter. But other than that, that's obviously where he got it. again, that's unisom anti-Mormonism. That's whatever helps you sleep at night. But it doesn't actually tell you where the Book of Mormon comes from. Okay, let's just say, for argument's sake, that Joseph Smith steals the idea of the vision of the tree of life from his father, which, by the way, wouldn't his father know that he was doing that when his father read that in the book? Wouldn't his dad be like, hey, son, you're like not even going to give me writing credit on here? What is this, a New York Times article? Aren't you gonna at least give me some kind of credit? Instead, is certain that Joseph Smith is a prophet. So, but let's just say that Joseph made it all up. Okay, what is that? What does that cover? Like 10 pages of the Book of Mormon? I'll give it to you. You got all those 10 pages. All those 10 pages Joseph made up from his father's vision that I don't even know whether his father told him. That isn't exactly the same, but is somewhat similar. And so therefore that's where those 10 pages came from. Now, where do the other 590 pages come from? Are there other people with similar visions? He's just copying them all down.
He's just running from house to house, writing down all the visions that all these people have.
And the funny part about that is, even though that's the claim, well, he's clearly just taking this from somewhere else. Nobody is making that argument in 1830 when the Book of Mormon's published. Why aren't the residents of the book of Palmyra saying, oh yeah, that Joe Smith guy, he kept coming to my house saying, hey, have you ever like had any visions of like Jesus and stuff? And then he was marking it down. And the next thing I know, it was in the Book of Mormon. In fact, you have the exact opposite that happens. You have all of these residents of Palmyra, all of these supposed experts, when Eber Howe in 1834 is collecting his allegations against the Smiths. They put forward that, here is where the text of the Book of Mormon comes from. It comes from not Joseph interviewing a bunch of people and taking their stories. It comes from Solomon Spaulding's novel that he wrote. And Joseph, scratches off Solomon Spaulding's name on the spine, puts his name there and goes, look, it's the Book of Mormon. I'm a prophet. That's the argument that's being made in 1834. And it's the argument that's going to be made throughout the remainder of the 19th century, actually. You find people struggling with this all the time. I was reading an early missionary's journal the other day, and he is talking all about how everywhere he goes to preach, some minister shows up. This is in the 1860s. Some minister shows up and says, oh, what about Solomon Spaulding? We all know the Book of Mormon is just invented by Solomon Spaulding, right? That was the argument to dismiss the Book of Mormon right up until the original Solomon Spaulding manuscript was located. And instead of it being word for word the Book of Mormon, a non-Mormon, the non-Latter-day Saint president of Oberlin College examines it and says that there, not only is it not word for word the same book, there is no name or incident common between the two. Not just, oh yeah, the protagonist of my novel is named Bephi, not Nephi, it's Bephi. And, Bephi is obviously a strong guy. And there's nothing similar. And, he makes the conclusion, some other explanation for the origin of the Book of Mormon must be found, if any is to be had. So for years, people make the argument, not that Joseph Smith made up the text of the Book of Mormon from people that he talked to, or from stories of his dad, or from visions that his mom had. They make the argument that someone else wrote it, and he just stole it and put his name on it. Only after the Solomon Spaulding manuscript turns out to be the greatest lie in 19th century American religious history. I mean, it probably is. It is something that is perpetrated. The halls of Congress, when they are talking about anti-Mormon legislation, part of what they say is, well, the Book of Mormon's all just this made-up crap that came from that Joe Smith stealing the Solomon Spaulding novel. All these wonderfully, supposedly intellectual people all bought the argument, hook, line, and sinker. And why did they buy it? Because they wanted to. The easiest thing in the world to do is to convince a bigoted person that their bigotry is right. That's the easiest thing to do. The easiest thing in the world to do is to convince someone that the position they already hold is right. Boy, they will love you as a friend, I'll tell you that. Someone starts telling you, I guarantee that LeBron James is a better basketball player than Michael Jordan. And you say something like, yeah, and I mean, look how many more years he played and he has the scoring title. Oh, hey, that guy, he's eating it up. He is all over it. Never mind the fact that in your mind, what you're really saying is, you got to be kidding me, right? You've seen Michael Jordan play, right? Like it's great. LeBron's great, but how many finals did Michael Jordan lose? Okay. The answer is 0 of them. So the only thing that stopped Michael Jordan from winning more finals was his dalliance with baseball. But that person, instantly grabs camaraderie with you just because you agree with them in what they already believe. And you see this so starkly with the Solomon Spaulding manuscript claim. Everyone wants an easy explanation for why it is that now hundreds of thousands of otherwise seemingly intelligent Christians believe that Joe Smith guy's a prophet. It doesn't work to simply just say they're all stupid. It doesn't work to simply just say, well, only idiots would believe that. Of course, they'll still say that. But too many intelligent people, too many disciples of Christ ministers, too many Methodist and Baptist ministers, too many people who are utterly devoted to the Bible embrace the gospel, the restored gospel of Jesus Christ, and join the Church of Christ for that argument to really work. So you need a better argument. And what's better argument is there than, well, the reason why people are being so deceived is the person who wrote this original book, the Solomon Spaulding. He was a minister, and he wrote a book that mimicked the language of the Bible, and he used all kinds of stuff from the Bible. And of course, he knew the Bible because he was a minister, and that's why people think they're being convinced by the Book of Mormon, but really it's just the Bible that this minister wrote into that. And people bought it. They bought it hook, line, and sinker, and they had no evidence. Did they have the Solomon Spaulding manuscript in front of them? Nope. What did they have? They had the testimony of a twice excommunicated, multiple times fornicator who said, oh yeah, you know what? In between my fornications while I was on my mission, I was, just lounging about the town, probably looking for my next fornication, and happened to come upon the manuscript of Solomon Spaulding. And in between that fornication and the next fornication, I read it and saw that it was literally exactly the same as the Book of Mormon. But instead of leaving the church immediately, I continued to fornicate. Then, after I was finally called back because people were tired of me being the fornicating missionary that I was excommunicated from the church, but then begged to get back into it, even though I'd already read the actual original source of the Book of Mormon. This is the dumbest argument I've literally ever heard in my life. That people put any stock in the idiocy of Dr. Philastus Hurlbut just shows that when people want to believe something, and in more particular, when people want to have a justification to hate something, they will take anything. And if you don't believe me, just pull up Facebook and read literally anything. The evidence that will be presented to you will be so incredibly bad for the arguments that they're trying to make. Why? Because it's driven by hatred a lot of the time. And arguments driven by hatred, they don't have to show their footnotes. They don't have to dot their I's and cross their T's, because the person who's listening, they aren't being an objective observer in the first place. They just want to be able to sleep at night feeling justified in their hatred. And that would be my response to, that was kind of a long response to Richard's question about.
I was, in fairness, I was trying to set up that, Robert Mason had a similar dream and he doesn't know Joseph Smith, but
I took it another way.
You took it another way. And I'll tell you what, I love the heck out of it. I think we should clip that and make that available on the free side, because I love that so much.
I feel like I'm a little too angry for the premium people know.
That was really good. I loved it. It is very, very, very frustrating. And one of the things, I didn't do you any favors with the question. In fairness, I was trying to talk about the more of the other thing, but I mentioned antagonists, and then it's my fault. I blame myself.
Yeah, I was triggered.
You were triggered. But the other thing is that before we started this episode, we were talking about future episodes, and we talked about in the future doing one about what the congressional record of anti-Mormonism in Idaho, and I we still might do that, but that didn't help setting the table for this, because you did get pretty worked up by that, because the arguments that they're making are they're just ridiculous. And to your point, they believe them because they want to believe them, despite any actual evidence about anything ever.
Right. Yeah. And it's the frustrating part is how many lives are destroyed by Philastus Hurlbut's lies. How many dozens of families
right.
But how many dozens of families are broken apart because the one person won't even listen because, well, they found the Book of Mormon manuscript and it's like just some guy's novel. Oh, really? Have you seen that? Well, no, but I mean, like the fornicator Philastus Hurlbut said he had it. So
that's what they would say. They would provide.
I have a hard time talking about Philastus Hurlbut without calling him the fornicator Philastus Hurlbut.
If you're playing a drinking game of fornicator for this episode, you're 3 sheets to the wind.
So, how many of the missionaries do you think are listening on the premium podcast that are playing an alcohol drinking game as they listen? What's the number?
Well, how many are listening from Wisconsin? I don't know.
Yeah, well, you got to, it's the only way you're going to get people to listen to you.
Yeah, it was. What is it? You play basketball, we beat you, we teach you. But in Wisconsin, it's not basketball. It's shots.
Yeah. It's like, if I can hold my liquor for another 2 shots of Jägermeister, then you have to listen to the First Vision. That's exactly what all of our first discussions were like. I do recall multiple times on my mission being offered alcohol. People offered us alcohol all the time. In part because you'd be out knocking on doors and it'd be super hot, and the guy'd answer the door and be like, "Oh, I don't listen to you, but you guys want a beer? You guys look super hot." I'm like, yeah, I kind of do. No, that's not what I said. But in my mind, I was thinking, I don't want to drink beer, but I am hot and thirsty enough.
I've never been offered more alcohol in my life than at a BYU Texas game in Austin. My gosh, everyone was so friendly.
Probably you were being offered the beer by the Texas fans, all the while they were telling you that they know everything about your church. That's the best part. It is fun when people are like, "I know all about Mormons. Do you want a coffee?" I don't know that you know as much about Mormons as you think you do. It's like coming up to a Lutheran and being like, "Hey, what do you say we go buy ourselves a sale of indulgences? What do you think? Just buy an indulgence that'll get us out of." I mean, don't worry, I know all about Lutheranism. The reason why it's frustrating is look, there are questions that we cannot answer. I got a text from a ward member today saying, I've got a brother-in-law, he's really struggling because he doesn't understand why Joseph Smith would have done this or that. He doesn't understand polygamy. There are questions for which you will not get a definitive answer in this life. Religion, the very fact that it is based upon the belief in God, precludes having objective evidence to demonstrate and verify that it is true. As I've said before many times on the other podcasts, you won't get to a point where you can prove scientifically that Jesus was resurrected. And even if you got to that point, you wouldn't be able to prove that he somehow took your sins upon him. That's not provable. So while we study history, while we look for sources, we always have to understand, if we are looking for an explanation for literally everything, we will eventually come to a point where there isn't one, where we won't know until we get to the next life. Whether it is how ceilings work or what the premortal life was like or what spirits are like when they're disembodied, we just won't know. On the other hand, if people want to enter in to historical arguments to try to prove that the Book of Mormon isn't true, that the gospel is somehow false, that Joseph Smith made it all up, you better bring something better than twice excommunicated fornicator claiming that he has a manuscript of the Book of Mormon that he won't show anybody. And how crazy is it that someone believed that argument? Philastus Hurlbut is legitimately convicted. This is not just Mormons saying like, oh yeah, you guys always slander people and say they're adulterers when they're not. Okay, well, let's say he's not an adulterer. You know what he is, according to a court in Chardon, Ohio? He threatened to murder Joseph Smith. He was convicted of, quote, threatening to wound, beat, or kill Joseph Smith. Oh, but maybe the non-Latter-day Saint judge who passed that sentence on him was also lying. I know, literally anyone who has anything to say that's not my argument, they're also all lying. The reality is he's the worst possible source of all possible terrible sources. And yet you still have people running around thinking that they're smart, quoting him as if he's a great source. I often have people present to me very bad sources. Look, some of them from inside of our church, trying to make the point that they want to make, trying to prove that this is how Joseph translated the Book of Mormon, or this is what we should really think about the word of wisdom, and on and on and on. And what's really frustrating is you go to those sources and you see where the person is deliberately not including a source that would be not very helpful to them. Hey, I noticed that you mentioned this prophet from 1860, this apostle, but you didn't mention President Nelson last week. Kind of seems like you may want to say what President Nelson's saying, right? I mean, so why aren't you saying it? And I've had that experience both inside of the church and outside of the church, where you demonstrate to someone that the thing that they're taking as a fact is in fact riddled with errors, historically provable errors. And they don't miss a beat. Yeah, well, I mean, what about What about the Book of Abraham then? I mean, like we just sat down to have a conversation where you said this X is the reason why you don't believe. And as soon as we discussed it to the point where you realize that you have no idea what you're talking about, instead of going, I don't know what I'm talking about, you say, yeah, well, what about this?
Gerrit, I will say that is one of the things that has been the most fascinating as your occasional sidekick on these things where we go and talk to folks, and they will come in and they always lead with their strongest case, right? They, why wait? So that they come for the heavy, or they come with the heavy and they go for it, and very quickly they realize that they don't know what they're talking about, and that the sources that they're referencing have actually one of the things that you say all the time is don't make an argument based on poor sources that support something that's faith promoting, because if you are doing that, then you're setting yourself up potentially to get wiped out. Well, so, not every blogger or whatever does that. Although my understanding is that the academic rigor on TikTok is pretty decent.
Through the roof. I mean, they're being peer reviewed. The only people who ever talk about anything on there are people who have PhDs in that field. It's amazing.
But I've seen that again and again and again, that the reason that they're so upset is this thing. And then they just immediately. And so one of the things that's incredibly valuable in what you are describing there is that there are many people that listen to this podcast that have people that they love, that are friends and family, and see what happens when we have that discussion and they bring up that particular topic, how quickly then they just go to the next thing. It shows a level of just kind of dishonesty to what it is that you're actually talking about, right? Because that isn't the issue. It must not be, because the next thing that wasn't an issue 5 minutes ago, now that one's the biggest one that ever was.
Yeah. And then if you resolve that one, well, then it's the next one. I mean, part of that is that's the design of anti-Mormon material. It is a mile wide, but an inch deep. There's a problem with everything. And if you don't have a problem with X, well, then you should have a problem with Y. And if you don't have a problem with Y, you should have a problem with Z. And what would normally happen in a normal everyday life is if you had a trusted friend who wanted you to invest in his 5 different business opportunities, and after you invested in the first one, he stole all of your money, beat you up, and burned your house down, you probably wouldn't invest with him on the second one. In normal interactions with people, when someone proves themselves to be an absolute dishonest purveyor of information, you don't run right out over the next thing they say and jump all over it and say, yes, I'm going to follow that. But anti-Mormonism has this, that part of the appeal of it is it makes people feel like that they are experts. It makes them feel like they know more than anyone else around them. And sometimes that pridefulness plays a role. I no longer have to go to church sitting there thinking, man, I really do need to repent. Instead, I can hear Sister Johnson get up and bear her testimony of Joseph Smith. And in the back of my head, instead of saying, you know what, I need to change, in the back of my head say, well, sure, she claims she has a testimony of Joseph Smith, but she doesn't even probably know about Helen Kimball. Right. I mean, that allows you to not let the Spirit work on you because you think you already have things figured out.
Thank you for listening to the Standard of Truth podcast, hosted by historian Dr. Gerrit Dirkmaat. If you know anybody that could benefit from the material in this episode, please share it with them. And for more resources, visit standardoftruth.com. Until next time.